My name is Alana Thomas,
And I'm Janae Cotton.
and we'll be talking a bit about homophobia in the Black community for our proposal project. When looking at some of the intersecting issues we've talked about in class, sexuality and race are the ones that stood out to us most. And while we were having a conversation about what topic we wanted to do, I mentioned a conversation we had in another class about the AME Church and the Methodist Church, which are sister churches, except one is white, and the AME Church is Black. Everything about them is pretty much the same in their theology, except for the fact that the Methodist Church is starting to be a bit more accepting of gay marriage, and it's actually caused a split in their church. But the AME Church is not even considering this issue because it's still largely frowned upon in the community. And when we talked about this example, it resonated with us, and it's a major reason that we decided to take a deeper look at homophobia within the Black community for our proposal project.
Expanding on what Lana just talked about within the African American community, within the church has always played a vital role in which we draw strength from, but it has also been looked at as a place of condemnation for African Americans who are part of the LGBTQ community. The church has always been an important part of our lives with identity development for a lot of African Americans, and it plays such a crucial role in so many youth's development stages, which can cause friction with their sexual identity and religious identity. So a lot of times African Americans or other minority groups don't receive that support they need during this transitional period because of homophobia being so predominant. Many, just out of fear of isolation, don't come out to their family and friends. So when doing this project, we took a closer look at some statistics about homophobia that Black youth face within their communities. So one of the first things we found was that 77% of Black LGBTQ youth say they have heard family members say negative things about LGBTQ people. Only 19% of Black LGBTQ youth say they can definitely be themselves at home. 47% of Black youth have been teased or mocked by family for being LGBTQ. Only 26% of Black LGBTQ youth have had their families get involved in their community. And while doing this project, it was made evident to me when talking to other people that this is something very common and that we sometimes just don't notice or are blind to just because it's something we've grown up around for such a long time.
So now we'll talk about some of the articles that we looked at, some of the journal articles. So the first one that I'll talk about is called Homophobia, Masculinity, and the U.S. Black Church. And the premise of this article is that it discusses the relationship between homophobia and the Black community and the Black church. And it points specifically to religious beliefs, historical sexual exploitation, and race survival consciousness as the primary sources of homophobia within the Black community. I also like that it mentioned the way that colonialism has influenced the Black community's relationship with hypermasculinity and homophobia. The second article we'll talk about is called Black-White Differences and Attitudes Toward Homosexuality and Gay Rights. The premise of this one is that it talks about a study that observes the differences between how Black and white communities feel about LGBTQ plus issues. The survey that is discussed in the journal says that across the board, Black people are more disapproving of homosexuality, and they're also 11 to 14% more likely to say that homosexuality is always wrong and that HIV and AIDS might be God's punishment for immoral sexual behavior.
To continue with the literature review, an article that I found was Growing Up Gay in Black America, an exploration of the coming out process of queer African American youth. This article really focused on the experience of coming out as an African American, but more specifically, the impact it has on relationships with family members and friends, which can also be tied in with the church, as we spoke about earlier. And it really just goes into depth on how childhood experiences of homophobia and heterosexism in the African American community and household influence beliefs about sexual orientation. Another article that we found was similarities and differences in homophobia among African Americans versus Caucasians. So, this article focused on a study that was conducted to observe the similarities and the differences among African Americans and Caucasians regarding negative and positive emotions expressed. And so, the results stated that African Americans do tend to express greater negativity towards homosexuals, and it was also made apparent that African American males express more negativity towards gay males when compared to lesbians within our community.
So now I'll talk a bit about the methodology. When we first started researching the project, we did a lot of looking online at statistics about our chosen topic. And then to localize the issue, we started looking at local organizations. Two of the ones that we looked at are Nashville Black Pride and Ignite, which is a Black LGBTQ plus social group. And then the third methodology that we used to conduct our research was really just having conversations with Black LGBTQ plus either MTSU students or Middle Tennessee residents about their experiences within their own communities and families. And this is our interview subject. We spoke with and photographed Kennedy Thomas, and she's an agriculture student at Tennessee University, and she also identifies as a bisexual woman. Throughout our photo shoot, she spoke with us a bit about how her father, being a pastor at a Black church, made it really challenging for her to come out as bisexual. One of the quotes is she said, "Being so involved with my church made it hard for me to come to terms with my sexuality. It never even felt like an option to exist outside of the boundaries my church and family agreed with." We think this story matters because it would center real people within our community who are often misrepresented and unheard, a lot like Kennedy, who we mentioned before. It would help eliminate some of the stigmas towards homosexuality in the Black community, and it would also provide some historical context for why homophobia is rampant in the Black community, because I don't want to demonize the Black community by saying that we're also homophobic. I want people to understand the historical context for why that is. And then I also want to open the floor for more conversation on relative topics, which today we'll talk about.
So, for example, some potential story angles that could be told with our project are how homophobia influenced lagging efforts in HIV/AIDS care and prevention measures, specifically within communities of color for the LGBTQ people. And also, another possible story angle would be a look into how anti-LGBTQ legislation impacts LGBTQ communities of color.
And then here are just a look at our sources.